Thank you. I'm Jim Zogby, and I want to make my first set of remarks to Jeremy. There is a handout that you've gotten of a poll that we did back in 2003 with Arab Americans and American Jews. What struck me when we did the poll was the degree to which both communities are within the margin of error of each other on most issues. When you look at the numbers, if you don't know which is which, you might get confused. The fact is that we often allow our communities to be defined by the loudest voices, but not by their majorities, both of which share a common set of goals. I say that because I was reflecting as Jeremy was speaking and referring to us as his partner, something I'm proud to be. Back 20 years ago when Oslo was signed and Vice President Gore asked myself and Mel Levine to chair Builders for Peace, Mel used to have a saying that I loved. He'd say, "We don't agree on the past. We don't even agree on the present, but we do agree on where we need to go." And it's still true. We each have our narratives, and we each have our histories. We each have what pains us most, which is precisely why we can represent the communities each of us represent. But what's different is that we want to end the pain and find a way to reconcile the narratives and to make peace. That is the ultimate challenge we face, but it's what we agree on. And I thank you for being there with us as a partner. I just have three very short comments about the Arab Peace Initiative. And the first is that, and it needs to be understood when we're talking about narratives, is that it was bitter. It was a bitter pill to swallow for many people in the Arab world. And it's important that you understand that, to understand how significant it was for people to say in a leadership role, we will find a way to put this behind us. There is an Arab narrative. Palestine doesn't exist as an issue. Palestine is an existential defining question for Arabs. It is to Arabs what Wounded Knee is to Native Americans. It's a history of betrayal. It's a story of loss of control of history. It's a story of others defining you and controlling you. It says to Arabs, whether they be from Morocco or the Gulf, it says, this is what happens when you lose control. This is our history gone awry. And it's painful. And for Arabs to say, in one fell swoop in Beirut, there will be mutual recognition. We will find a way to put this behind us. We will normalize. It's something that generations grew up saying never. It can never happen. And so it was a major step forward. And it was a tough one for many to swallow. But I remember being with Rafiq Hariri just a few years after, shortly actually before he was murdered. And I remember him saying that what struck him was that 10 years earlier, if you'd said, I want to make peace with Israel, there was no way to have that conversation in the Arab world. No way at all. And it wasn't just that Arab leaders did it, based on actually what Rafiq had said. I decided that we would poll across the Arab world, and you have the 2009 version. After everything that had happened in the 6 years that followed, you still have in almost every Arab country between 2/3 and 3/4 saying, we believe two states are possible. We think it's a desirable outcome. It's one we want to have. The conversation changed completely in the Arab world. You now could talk about peace. And so it was both bitter, but it also was transformative. It opened a conversation that had not existed and made it legitimate and actually made it acceptable. But there's a warning, and that is that as bitter as it was, as transformative as it was, as much hope as it might have created, it's also unfulfilled. And there's a way of, I think, all of us have to look at the last several years and understand that the bitterness grows. And the sense that, what's interesting about that poll is if you look at the difference in the color, the shading colors, about 2/3 to 3/4 say it's the desired outcome. But more than half think it'll never happen because Israel won't get out of the territories and let it happen. And somehow that sense of cynicism that grows only gets deeper. When we polled actually on our own president back when he was first elected, we found significant support across the Arab world. A place where people needed hope was there. They needed to believe America was going to change. And they actually were willing to buy into that. The most recent poll we did last summer across the Arab world, people said the hope didn't come. The attitudes are lower today, less favorable toward America, less believing that America can make a difference today than they were even during the Bush administration. Because hope, once inspired and then dashed, has a toll. I just want to close after that with a comment. There are those who say the Israelis didn't do enough, and there are those who say the Arabs didn't do enough. But my mom used to tell me, when I'd be blaming everybody else in the world, she'd say, you can only be responsible for what you can be responsible for. And so for me, the challenge is, what am I not doing? What do I have to do? And I actually believe that Arab Americans and American Jews have a challenge here. Our challenge isn't to blame the Arabs or blame the Israelis. Our challenge is to look at ourselves and to say, what can we do to change the American discourse? I remember the White House lawn. And if you look at that handshake in very, very slow motion, you see something interesting happening. One hand goes out, another hand doesn't come. Bill Clinton comes along and does a little nudge. And at the nudge, both hands joined. The question is, where the hell's the nudge? And it's got to come. It's got to come from us changing the political discourse here in America. I mean, there is a need for America to play a role. And right now we're not playing that role and have not been for the longest of times. And so I leave it with you that the challenge we face at this 10-year watershed moment in this region is, what can we do? How can we make a difference in this debate? And what are the things that we can do to change this institution where we are right now, which acts as defiantly and as anti-peace as any institution on earth? It's this Congress that is a major obstacle to forward movement. We've got to find a way to put ourselves in front of this debate and make sure that this November happens in a very different way than previous Novembers, and elects people who make a difference, who want this to happen. Because the only way that peace is going to come is if there's a constituency that wants peace, and if people realize it is essential for all of us to make it happen. And so I thank you, and we will now go to questions and answers. Thank you.